All right, next morning, I've made some changes and put the board back. Let me go through what the changes are for you. C1 and C6 have been changed from 22 microfarad to 4.7 microfarad. I don't want to get too far into the math. Basically, they're flat down to 30-something hertz rather than flat down to about 7 hertz. The real fundamental difference as a player is that while you will still have everything from your low E string up, the stuff around 40 dB is quite a bit lower in comparison than it would be with this. So these just kind of desludge the input. You're not losing any functional bass for guitar. It's just no longer an amp which is flat down to infinity, pretty much. You know, this was never designed to be a guitar amp solely. This was for bass, organ, accordion, anything Leo could sell you that needed amplification. To target it more for the guitar frequency range, I like to decrease those coupling caps there. It's optional. You don't have to do it. I find you get a lot less wasted energy and you got a little output clarity increase as a result. I also changed the bypass cap here on the LDR part of the Tremolo circuit from 22 to 4.7. But most of the amps that left the factory did not have a 25 there. They had a 5. And I've replicated that with this 4.7. And what that does is it just makes the speed pot track faster. So if you turn it from slow to fast real quickly, the tremolo is right there with you. There's no lag while it waits. And because usually if you have it low and you turn it fast, the tremolo just kind of stops for a second and then comes back in at the higher speed. Decreasing that cap to 4.7 just gives you a much more instantaneous tremolo speed change. Other things I've done here, I put in took out a 10 nanofarad, put in a 22 nanofarad. This is the second cap in the LFO circuit, and this just slows the minimum speed a little bit so that tremolo will go a little bit slower, still go plenty fast. Pretty common mod. The owner complained that the tremolo had some thudding to it before. I've not heard it yet. We may revisit this area after we hear it. But he did ask for a slower trem. The only other change I've made here, besides moving the screen grid resistors, which I've shown you yesterday, is right here underneath these yellow and red wires. The two 220K resistors here, which are the bias grid leak resistors. I just don't trust those little quarter-watt size half watts that come stock from the factory. I put in some larger half watts that I know the specs on and I trust more. That's critical. Won't make any difference in the sound until the amp stops working because the old part failed. Everything else in here is pretty good. So next, here we are at my old favorite topic of discussion, the Reverb driver tube V3. As I mentioned in many videos, in the 60s they had the cathode cross from 3 to 8, and they had the grid cross from 2 to 7, and they had a loop going around the tube from 1 to 6. That's the plate. In the reissues, for whatever reason, they have the cathode cross from 3 to 8, and they have the plates cross from 1 to 6, and they loop the grid. I don't know why, but on this circuit, it often hums in the reverb, and with the 60s circuit, it does not. So I'm going to redo this like they did it in the 60s. You can see here that I've removed most of the old wires, got the old solder off the pins that are needed. I'm going to recreate this properly. I can't show you the work as I do it because the camera needs to be right where I need to be. But here's the before. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, then I'm going to do it. I'm going to have a wire from pin 7, where the grid is, to pin 2, making sure there's a gap between that wire and the cathode connection here. And then I'm going to reconnect this blue wire to pin 6, then run another length of blue wire from 6 to 1 and a loop around here, just like they did in the 60s. I don't know why, but that usually results in a quieter reverb driver. Okay, now you can see it's all done. Everything very nice and neat. A little bit of 22 gauge bus wire connecting the grids. The cathode's still the original and it's up elevated way over the grids. And a nice new blue wire going from 1 to 6, looping around the tube neatly. Let's turn our attention to ye old output jacks. We'll make sure that they're very tight, which they are not. That one is free spinning. Did they not use tooth washers? No, they did not. Let us correct that. Some of the most crucial grounds in the entire amp, And Fender couldn't be bothered to use a 5-cent toothed washer. That's their price, or less. Our price, these are about 10 to 15 cents each. I bet they probably get these negotiated for a couple of pennies, if that. If and they cared. Which they don't. Now let's tighten these up, shall we? Make sure the reverb jacks are tight too. They are. All right. That's much more reliable. Those were loose enough that I could have taken them off with my fingers, let alone using a tool. And there was no tooth washer holding them in place. And since the output transformer relies on a good chassis connection there for the whole thing to be working safely for the tubes in the transformer, I mean, not for you. You just wouldn't have any sound until you notice the smoke coming out and a very expensive repair. Some things you cannot skip. I don't care. There's no rationale for it. If you have a ground made to chassis with a switchcraft jack, you make sure that effer is tight. Time to do the octal sockets. Now here, I've got the quick connects for the heaters. I'm going to snip those off. We're actually going to shorten them in the process and neatly tie them. But we won't be needing these. These are the heater connections here at 7 and 2 on this reversed octal socket. I'm going to remove some solder from these pins, connect these to that. Then I'm going to run this orange wire to the pin 4 of this tube, which is hard to see here, and then run a 470 ohm 3-watt resistor to pin 4. And I'll remove that old orange wire. Then I'll run an orange wire from pin 6 of this tube to pin 6 of this tube, put the resistor here. I'll be showing this tube because you can see this tube. The other one's all hidden by the fuse holder and the power switch. So this will be our friend, but both will get done. Let me get that done right now, because again, where I need to work is where the camera is, and if I use the overhead rig, you really can't see what I'm doing in that space. It's just my hands will be up on top of it. So you can see the heater wires here moved to the octal socket. The little green wires are going off to the lamp. All the black and white wires are going off to the other tubes in sequence. Got 100 ohm half watt bias balance resistors here mounted from pins 2 and 7 to pin 8, the cathode. That does a nice job, and if something goes wrong, they're up in the air away from other things. And then I was out of the 3 watts, so these are 5 watt, 470 ohms. They'll certainly do more than do the job. There's no harm in using a higher wattage resistor there. Just don't want to go lower than 1 watt. 2 to 3 watts is probably much better than 1 watt. And 5 watts is a little bit overkill, but no one ever complained about having something be, oh no, that's too reliable. So that gets us to today's stopping point. I've got to go do some family stuff. So next we will deal with some changes on the preamp board where all the pots and jacks are. Not the preamp board, but the front panel board. Just a few little tweaks, making sure everything's reliable. We'll put it together. We'll listen to it. We'll see if that tremolo thud that he was talking about, or I think he actually said more of a whomp. So we'll make sure the whomp is gone. That'll be next time.